Hi Dorian, it's your Auntie Shannon. I was hoping you could read a book with me. How does the Moon Book sound? You ready? Our moon is the brightest and biggest light in our night sky. It outshines all the stars and planets, which appear as small as points of light. Some planets have many moons, but Earth has one. See, that's our moon. A star burns gases that give off heat and light, and the sun is a star. A planet reflects sunlight and revolves around the sun. Earth is a planet. Look, it's Earth. Our moon looks big and bright because it's so close to Earth. Compared to the faraway stars and planets, it's about 238,900 miles away. Look how far that is. The moon makes no light of its own to shine. It is bright in the night sky because it reflects the sun's light. It's about 1/4 the size of Earth. It's made up of rock and dust, and there's no air or sign of life. Earth is about 8,000 miles in diameter and 25,000 miles around. But the moon is only about 2,000 miles in diameter and 6,800 miles around. Astronomers study the planets, the moons, and all of their stars. And an orbit is the path of one object around another, like the way our moon goes around the Earth. Most astronomers and other scientists think our moon formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Some believe something collided with Earth that tossed out a cloud of rock and debris. And while orbiting around Earth, the rock and debris came together and it formed the moon. See, just like that. The ancient times, people thought the moon was a powerful god or goddess. The Romans called their moon Goddess Diana. In Greece, the moon goddess was Selene, who rode through the sky in a silver chariot. Some American Indian tribes believed the moon and the sun were brothers and sister gods. See? Those are all of the different ways the moon are. Stories and legends were told about the shapes and shadows that show on the moon's surface. Some people said the moon showed a man's face. The man in the moon who was imprisoned there for stealing. Others told of a moon with demons living there. Do you see the man in the moon? The moon is Earth's only natural satellite. It takes about 1 month for the moon to travel around Earth. See? The satellite is an object that orbits around a larger one, just like the moon goes around our Earth. And the moon makes one complete rotation all the way around for each complete trip around the Earth. Thus, the same side of the moon is always facing us. You see that? No matter where it is, the same place is looking. The moon appears to change shape, but it doesn't. The different shapes we see are called phases of the moon. We're seeing different amounts of light being reflected on the moon. How much light we see depends on the position of the Earth, the moon, and the sun. Do you see how it goes around? And it all changes. The phases of the moon. During a new moon, the moon is almost directly between the sun and the Earth. The moon looks dark, and we see no reflection of light. During the crescent moon, the moon is waxing when the lit surface we see is getting bigger. In a few days, a bit of the sunlight side shows the moon's shadows, and it forms the crescent. The first quarter moon, when the moon is a quarter of its way around the Earth, it's in its first quarter phase, and we see it as half lit. It's sometimes called a half moon. When the moon is waxing between the first quarter moon and the full moon, it's called a gibbous moon. See? About 2 weeks have passed since the new moon, and now the entire face of the moon we see shines. It's a full moon. A gibbous moon, the moon is waning when the lit surface seems to be getting smaller. When the moon is waning between the full moon and the last quarter moon, it's a gibbous moon once again. The last quarter moon, when the moon is 3/4 of the way around Earth in its last quarter phase, again we see it's half lit, and it's sometimes called a half moon. You see? The crescent moon, once again we see a small sliver of moonlight. And the new moon. It takes the moon about 1 month to go through an entire set of phases. People used to know the time of the month by watching the moon's phases. See how it goes all the way around? A solar eclipse. The moon's orbit around Earth is usually tilted just slightly compared to Earth's orbit around the sun. Because of this, the moon cannot exactly line up between the sun and the Earth. But when the moon's orbit is not tilted and the moon lines up exactly between the Earth and the sun, a solar eclipse happens. Do you see? The moon's shadows fall on Earth. A solar eclipse can last up to 7½ minutes. There's even a project if you want to go look. But you never look at an eclipsed moon directly. A solar eclipse? A lunar eclipse, on the other hand, when the sun, earth, and moon are exactly lined up, a lunar eclipse happens. As in a solar eclipse, the moon's orbit is not tilted. The earth blocks off the sunlight that usually lights up the moon, and the moon gets a reddish glow. Lunar comes from luna, the Latin word for moon. A lunar eclipse can last up to 3½ hours. And you can look at that. The moon affects the oceans too. The moon's pull, called gravity, on the oceans is strong enough to cause tides. Tides are the daily rising and falling of the ocean's waters. A high tide happens about every 13 hours. Do you see how high the water is? And a low tide happens about every 13 hours. Do you see how low it's going? This is because the moon takes about 25 hours to come back to the same place it was in the sky the night before. And tide differences vary around the world. Some night sky gazers and astronomers can get a close-up view of the moon by looking through binoculars. Others look through telescopes, and some huge telescopes are used at observatories. See, binoculars and a telescope, and that's a great big telescope that lets you see the moon. A close-up view of the moon's surface shows dark patches. Astronomer calls plains or seas. Other areas are covered with craters, mountains, and valleys. The moon's craters are formed between 3.5 and 4.5 billion years ago, when meteors pounded at its surface. Do you see where the valleys and the craters are? And a plain, which is called a sea. For centuries, people have wanted to know more about our moon. In 1959, the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 transmitted to Earth the first pictures of the far side, or backside, of the moon. There aren't as many dark areas on that side as on the side we see from Earth. Do you see? That's the back of the moon. That's the part we can't see from down here on Earth. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a commitment to put Americans on the moon before the end of the decade. At first, many American unmanned spacecraft were sent. Pictures were taken. The Surveyor 1 landed on the moon in 1966. It sent back information about the moon's surface, and the first manned orbit of the moon was made by Apollo 8 astronauts in 1968. See? That was Apollo 8 going to the moon. On July 20th, in 1969, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin of the Apollo 11 mission became the first men to walk on the moon. There were 5 more Apollo landings on the moon, and the last one, Apollo 17, was in 1972. The astronauts did experiments and gathered samples. Astronomers and other scientists were able to learn more about the history and the nature of the moon. On a clear night when the moon is in the sky, gaze up at it. We're still learning more about our closest neighbor, the moon. See everybody looking? And there's a whole bunch of stories and facts about the moon. I'm going to make sure I bring this book to you next time I see you so you can read all about it, okay? I hope you enjoyed reading the moon book with me, Dorian. I'll see you soon.